What if I told you that the United States of America could have been 5 separate countries right now? Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that your country no longer exists as you know it. The flag has changed, your passport is worthless, and the state you live in is now a completely independent nation with its own president, its own laws, and its own destiny. Sound impossible? Well, throughout history, nations far more unified than ours have crumbled overnight. And America has come closer to splitting apart than most people realize. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating and terrifying alternate history scenarios ever imagined. What if the United States split into 5 separate countries? How would it happen? What would these new nations look like? And most importantly, how would your life change forever? Stick around because by the end of this video, you'll never look at America the same way again. Let's start with reality. The United States, as we know it, is a nation of 50 states, 330 million people, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It's the world's largest economy, the most powerful military on Earth, and a cultural superhouse that influences every corner of the globe. But here's the thing. This unity, it's not as solid as it seems. America has always been a patchwork of different regions, different cultures, different values, and different visions for the future. From the very beginning, the Founding Fathers argued about states' rights versus federal power. We fought a brutal civil war that killed over 600,000 people because the country couldn't agree on its own identity. And even today, political divisions run deeper than ever. Red states versus blue states, urban versus rural, coastal elites versus the heartland. The cracks are already there. All it would take is one major crisis to shatter everything. So how could this split actually happen? Let's imagine a realistic scenario. It's the year 2030. America is facing a perfect storm of crises. The economy is in freefall after a massive financial collapse worse than 2008. Unemployment is skyrocketing. Inflation is out of control. Meanwhile, a deeply contested presidential election has thrown the country into chaos. Both sides claim victory. Neither side will concede. Protests erupt in every major city. Then, the unthinkable happens. Several state governors, frustrated with federal gridlock and seeing their constituents suffer, make a bold declaration. They announce that their states will no longer recognize the authority of the federal government. They're going independent. At first, Washington tries to stop them, but the military is divided. Some generals support the breakaway states. Others remain loyal to the Union. The country is paralyzed, and within months, the unthinkable becomes reality. America splits into 5 distinct nations. Let's meet these 5 new countries, starting with the Northeast. This new nation includes states like New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Maryland, Delaware, and Washington, D.C. The Northeast would be a powerhouse right from day one. With New York City as its likely capital, this country would have the financial center of the world, some of the best universities on the planet, and a highly educated population. Wall Street, the United Nations headquarters, Harvard, MIT, all of it would belong to the Northeast. Politically, this nation would be progressive, liberal, and globally minded. Think universal health care, strong environmental regulations, and close ties to Europe. The economy would be driven by finance, technology, education, and media. But there's a problem. The Northeast would be heavily dependent on imports for energy and food. Without the oil from Texas or the agriculture from the Midwest, this country would need to establish trade deals immediately or face shortages. Still, with its wealth and global connections, the Northeast would likely become a major player on the world stage, rivaling countries like Germany or the United Kingdom. Next up, the South. This new nation would include Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Wait, you might be thinking, didn't I say Texas would be its own country? Hold that thought, we'll get there. But in this scenario, let's first imagine the South as a unified bloc. The South would be a giant, both in size and resources. With access to the Gulf of Mexico, vast oil reserves, a huge agricultural base, and major cities like Atlanta, Miami, and Houston, the South would be economically self-sufficient. Politically, this nation would lean conservative, emphasizing states' rights, lower taxes, religious values, and a strong military. The culture would be distinct, rooted in Southern hospitality, deep historical pride, and a fierce sense of independence. But the South would also face serious challenges. Poverty rates are higher in many Southern states. Infrastructure needs massive investment, and the legacy of racial tension and inequality would require serious attention. Still, with its resources and population of over 100 million people, the South would be a formidable nation, likely rivaling countries like Brazil or Mexico in terms of regional influence. Now let's talk about the Midwest. This new country would include states like Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota. The Midwest would be the agricultural heartland, the breadbasket of the continent. With vast farmlands producing corn, wheat, soybeans, and livestock, this nation would control a critical resource: food. But it's not just about farms. The Midwest is also home to major manufacturing hubs, especially in the auto industry. Cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Minneapolis would drive a diverse economy. Politically, the Midwest would likely be centrist, pragmatic, and focused on economic stability. The people here value hard work, community, and common-sense solutions. They're not as ideologically extreme as the coasts. Contrarily, the Midwest would be modest, humble, and deeply rooted in small-town values. But there are challenges. The region has struggled with economic decline, especially in the Rust Belt. Jobs have disappeared as factories closed. Young people have moved away. The Midwest would need to reinvent itself, perhaps by investing in renewable energy, technology, and education. Despite these challenges, the Midwest would be essential to the survival of the other nations. Control the food supply, and you control everything. Now let's head west. This new nation would include California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Alaska, and Hawaii. The West would be the most diverse, the most innovative, and the most economically powerful of the 5 nations. California alone has an economy larger than most countries, with Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and vast agricultural output. Add in the tech hubs of Seattle, the natural resources of Alaska, the tourism of Hawaii, and the stunning landscapes of the Mountain West, and you've got a nation with almost unlimited potential. Politically, the West would be a mixed bag. The coastal states like California, Oregon, and Washington would be progressive, focused on environmentalism, tech innovation, and social justice. But the interior states like Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho would be more conservative, valuing independence, gun rights, and traditional values. This internal divide could cause tension, but it could also create a unique balance. Culturally, the West would be defined by innovation, diversity, and a pioneering spirit. This is the land of dreamers, entrepreneurs, and adventurers. But the West would also face serious challenges. Water scarcity is a massive issue, especially in states like California, Arizona, and Nevada. Wildfires, droughts, and climate change would threaten the region. And economically, the West would need to maintain trade relationships to export its technology and entertainment products. Still, with its resources, talent, and creativity, the West would likely emerge as a global superpower, rivaling nations like Japan or South Korea. And finally, Texas. Yes, Texas gets to be its own country. Because let's be honest, Texas has always thought of itself as its own country anyway. The Republic of Texas would include, well, just Texas. But don't underestimate the Lone Star State. With a population of over 30 million people, a booming economy, vast oil and natural gas reserves, major cities like Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio, and a fierce independent streak, Texas would thrive as a standalone nation. Politically, Texas would be conservative, pro-business, and fiercely protective of its sovereignty. The government would prioritize low taxes, minimal regulation, and a strong military. Culturally, Texas would embrace its unique identity, a blend of Southern hospitality, Western cowboy spirit, Mexican influence, and modern innovation. Economically, Texas would be a powerhouse. Energy exports would generate billions. The tech industry in Austin would rival Silicon Valley. Agriculture and manufacturing would provide stability. And with access to the Gulf of Mexico, Texas would be a major trading hub. But Texas would also face challenges. Income inequality is high. Infrastructure, especially the power grid, needs serious upgrades. And the state's rapid growth would strain resources like water. Still, if any state could make it as an independent nation, it's Texas. So now we have 5 countries: the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, the West, and Texas. But what would actually happen after the split? Let's explore the consequences, starting with politics and power. Each of these new nations would need to establish its own government from scratch. Constitutions would be written, presidents or prime ministers would be elected, legislatures would be formed, and immediately there would be tension. Who controls the nuclear weapons? The United States currently has over 5,000 nuclear warheads. Would they be divided among the 5 nations? Would one country try to claim them all? This could lead to a dangerous arms race, or worse, a nuclear standoff. And what about the military? The U.S. military is the most powerful in the world, but it's deeply integrated. Bases are spread across all regions. Soldiers come from every state. After the split, would service members stay loyal to their home nation or to the country they swore to defend? Some units might refuse to disband. Others might defect. The potential for conflict, even civil war, would be very real. Then there's the question of alliances. Would these 5 nations cooperate, or would they become rivals? The Northeast and the West might form a close alliance based on shared progressive values. The South and Texas might partner based on conservative ideology and energy resources. The Midwest, sitting in the center, might try to play mediator, or it might be forced to choose sides. Internationally, the world would be watching closely. China, Russia, and the European Union would see this as an opportunity. A divided America is a weakened America. These global powers might try to form alliances with individual nations, offering trade deals or military support in exchange for influence. The geopolitical balance of power would shift dramatically. Now let's talk about the economy, because this is where things get really complicated. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. It's used in international trade, it's trusted globally, and it's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. But if the United States no longer exists, what happens to the dollar? Each of the 5 new nations would need to establish its own currency. The Northeast might create the Atlantic dollar. The South might use the Confederate credit, though that name probably wouldn't go over well, so let's call it the Gulf dollar. The Midwest might use the Heartland dollar. The West might create the Pacific dollar. And Texas? Well, Texas would definitely call its currency the Texas dollar, or maybe bring back the Texas Star. The global economy, which is deeply tied to the US dollar, would be thrown into turmoil. Stock markets around the world would crash. Trade would grind to a halt. It could trigger a worldwide depression worse than the 1930s. Over time, the new nations might stabilize their currencies, but it would take years, maybe decades, and some countries would fare better than others. The Northeast and the West, with their strong economies and global connections, might create stable, trusted currencies. But the Midwest, the South, and even Texas might struggle, especially if they face trade barriers or economic isolation. Trade between the five nations would also be a major issue. Right now, goods and services flow freely across state lines, but after the split, each nation would have its own trade policies, tariffs, and regulations. Imagine you're a farmer in Iowa. You used to sell your corn to buyers in California, Texas, and New York without any hassle. But now, each of those places is a foreign country. You need export licenses, you face tariffs, your costs go up, your profits go down. Or imagine you're a tech company in Silicon Valley. You used to ship products across the country. Now you need to navigate 5 different legal systems, 5 different tax codes, 5 different sets of regulations. Business would become infinitely more complicated. Some industries would collapse, others would adapt, but the economy as a whole would take a massive hit. And let's not forget about debt. The United States currently has over $30 trillion in national debt. Who's responsible for paying that back? Would the debt be divided among the 5 nations based on population or GDP? Would some countries refuse to pay their share? This could lead to legal battles, international disputes, and economic chaos. Creditors like China and Japan, who hold billions in U.S. Treasury bonds, would be furious. They might demand immediate repayment, which none of the new nations could afford. The result? Default, bankruptcy, and a collapse of trust in the global financial system. Now let's get personal. How would your daily life change? Let's start with travel. Right now, you can drive from Maine to California without stopping at a single border. But after the split, you'd need a passport to cross into a different country. Planning a road trip from New York to Texas? You'd need to pass through multiple nations, each with its own border controls, customs checks, and visa requirements. Flying would be even worse. International flights, even between former states, would require customs, immigration, and all the headaches that come with international travel. Family gatherings would become complicated. Imagine your parents live in Florida, but you live in Illinois. Now you're in different countries. Visiting them means international travel, currency exchange, and possibly expensive flights. Holidays would never be the same. And what about work? If you live in one nation but work in another, you'd be a foreign worker. You'd need a work visa, you'd pay taxes in 2 countries, and your employer would face a mountain of bureaucracy. Remote work might become the norm, but even that would be complicated by different laws, time zones, and regulations. Healthcare would also change dramatically. Right now, Medicare and Medicaid are federal programs. After the split, each nation would create its own system. The Northeast and the West might implement universal health care. The South and Texas might stick with private insurance. The Midwest might try a hybrid model. If you move from one country to another, you could lose your coverage entirely. Prescription drug prices, hospital access, and insurance costs would vary wildly. Education would be another major shift. Federal student loans? Gone. Each nation would create its own system. College tuition could skyrocket in some countries and drop in others. Your degree from a university in one nation might not be recognized in another. Families would have to think carefully about where to send their kids to school. And let's talk about culture and identity. Right now, being American means something. It's a shared identity, a common bond. But after the split, that identity would fracture. Are you a Northeasterner, a Southerner, a Midwesterner, a Westerner, or a Texan? Regional pride would replace national pride. Sports would change too. The NFL, NBA, MLB, and other leagues are national. Would they stay unified, or would each country create its own leagues? The Super Bowl might become an international event, with teams from different nations competing, or it might disappear entirely. Hollywood, which is based in California, would belong to the West. Would movies and TV shows still represent all 5 nations, or would each country develop its own entertainment industry? Music, art, and pop culture would become more regional, more divided. Language might even start to diverge. Over time, regional accents could harden into distinct dialects. The South might embrace a more traditional, slower way of speaking. The Northeast might become faster, more clipped. The West might incorporate more Spanish and Asian influences. In 100 years, would people from these 5 nations even be able to understand each other? It's not impossible. Let's talk about international relations, because the rest of the world wouldn't just sit back and watch. A divided America would be a weaker America, and that would change everything. China, currently America's biggest rival, would see this as a golden opportunity. Without a unified United States to counter its influence, China could expand its power in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Taiwan might fall under Chinese control. The South China Sea could become a Chinese lake. And economically, China could dominate global trade, pushing its currency, the yuan, as the new global reserve currency. Russia would also benefit. With America distracted by internal chaos, Russia could make moves in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the Arctic. NATO, which relies heavily on American support, might collapse. European nations would be left to fend for themselves, and some might even align with Russia out of necessity. In the Middle East, American influence would evaporate. Israel would lose its strongest ally. Iran might become the dominant regional power. Oil prices would swing wildly as the new American nations compete for energy security. And terrorist groups might see the chaos as an opportunity to regroup and launch new attacks. Latin America would face its own challenges. Mexico, which shares a border with both Texas and the West, would need to navigate relationships with 2 different countries. Trade, immigration, and security agreements would all need to be renegotiated. Drug cartels, already powerful, might exploit the chaos, expanding their operations and influence. Europe would be forced to step up. The European Union might finally create a unified military to fill the power vacuum left by America. Germany, France, and the UK would take on leadership roles they've avoided for decades. But Europe is already divided, dealing with its own economic and political challenges. Could they really replace America as the world's policeman? Probably not. The world would become more unstable, more dangerous, and more unpredictable. Regional conflicts that America once helped manage would spiral out of control. Nuclear proliferation would increase. Climate change, already a global crisis, would worsen without unified American leadership. The dream of a peaceful, cooperative world order would be shattered. But here's a question for you. Would this split be all bad, or could there be some positives? Let's think about it. For decades, many Americans have felt like their voices don't matter. People in rural areas feel ignored by coastal elites. People in cities feel held back by conservative policies. Red states and blue states can't agree on anything. Maybe a split would allow each region to govern itself according to its own values. The Northeast could have universal health care, strong environmental protections, and progressive social policies. The South could have lower taxes, fewer regulations, and traditional values. The Midwest could focus on agriculture and manufacturing. The West could lead in technology and innovation. And Texas, well, Texas could be Texas. People could choose where to live based on what kind of society they want. If you value personal freedom and low taxes, move to Texas. If you value social services and environmentalism, move to the Northeast. It could be the ultimate experiment in democracy, with 5 different models competing to prove which works best. Innovation might even increase. Without a massive federal bureaucracy slowing things down, each nation could move faster, experiment more, and adapt to challenges more quickly. Competition between the 5 nations could drive progress in ways a single unified country never could. And let's be honest, a smaller government might actually be more responsive to its citizens. Right now, Congress is paralyzed, the president has limited power, and most people feel like Washington doesn't care about them. In a smaller nation, your vote might actually matter. Your voice might actually be heard. So maybe, just maybe, a split wouldn't be the end of the world. Maybe it would be a new beginning. But let's not kid ourselves. The risks far outweigh the benefits. The immediate aftermath of a split would be catastrophic. Economic collapse, political chaos, potential violence, and international instability would make life worse for almost everyone. Millions of people would lose their jobs, savings would be wiped out, families would be torn apart, and the long-term consequences would be just as bad. A divided America would be a weaker America. The 5 new nations might cooperate, or they might become rivals. They might even go to war with each other. History is full of examples of nations that split apart and then fought bitterly for decades. Look at India and Pakistan. Look at North and South Korea. Look at the former Yugoslavia. These divisions don't heal easily. They fester, they grow, and they explode. And even if the 5 nations managed to avoid war, they would still face enormous challenges. Climate change doesn't respect borders. Pandemics don't stop at state lines. Economic crises spread globally. These are problems that require cooperation, not division. A fractured America would struggle to address these existential threats. The world would be worse off, and so would we. So here's the big question. Could this actually happen? Is America really at risk of splitting apart? Honestly, it's hard to say. Right now, the political divisions are deep. Trust in government is at an all-time low. Economic inequality is growing, and social tensions are high. But America has survived worse. We survived a civil war. We survived the Great Depression. We survived 2 world wars. We've always found a way to come together when it matters most. But here's the thing. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And the conditions that could lead to a split, economic crisis, political gridlock, regional divisions, they're all present today. All it would take is one major shock, one crisis that pushes people over the edge, and the unthinkable could become reality. So what can we do to prevent it? First, we need to listen to each other. Stop demonizing people who think differently. Recognize that we're all Americans, even if we disagree. Second, we need to fix our institutions. Congress needs to start working again. Elections need to be fair and trusted, and leaders need to put the country ahead of their own ambitions. Third, we need to invest in our future. Education, infrastructure, healthcare. These are the things that bind a nation together. If people feel like the system is working for them, they're less likely to want to tear it down. And finally, we need to remember what makes America special. It's not our wealth or our power. It's our ideals, freedom, equality, opportunity. These are the things that unite us, and we can't let them go. So what do you think? Could America really split into 5 countries? Which nation would you want to live in? And do you think a split would be a disaster, or could it actually work? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Next time, we're going to explore an even crazier scenario. What if America became a monarchy? Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.